people become historians in general, I think, because it's characterological. There's something in history that just, as the editor of the American Historical Review says, historians are allergic to psychology.
Do any of the other panelists have response to the questions? Or
It's interesting what you say, David. I was thinking a little bit about the fact that history, anyone, it's hard because when you're focused on history, to me it often feels it's burdensome or traumatic subject matter. And there's an attachment to it, but at the same time, such resistance in thinking about it psychologically, because that would mean moving forward. Away from history.
Having feelings. And I think you're onto something, because it's that trauma that is embedded in what historians do, but they escape it by writing a narrative.
Well, narratives are often psychologically informed, and
every historian is a psychologist in some way, because they have some way of explaining human behavior. But it's not self-consciously learned, and you become a historian without having to ever take a course in psychology.
So how much of...
David, then Peter, then Paul, then Mary.
I was wondering, how much of that animus...
Louder.
How much of the animus, the animosity from the academic historical profession has to do with the connection to psychoanalysis?
I think it's absolutely central.
Okay, because that makes it understandable in a sort of a little less paranoid sounding way, right? That they're just singling us out, because there is a huge backlash against anything psychoanalytic in a number of academic fields.
But I think it's also psychology, period.
I took an escape route. I wrote regular history, and then I wrote psychohistory. And once I had tenure, I wrote more and more psychohistory. Once I retired, I really wrote something. So it is permission almost that you have, or I took permission as I went along in my career, to get further and further into it, because I didn't give a damn after a while what people said. I just wrote what I wanted to write. And once you're in the field for 30 years, most people can't say a whole lot. So I just continued to go. And the further I went into it, the more easy it got, the less people objected to it in my department.
Well, I think it's easy to exaggerate the degree of resistance under editors Robert Webb and Otto Flans from 68 to 85. You had editors of the American Historical Review. You had some psychohistorical pieces being published, including two by Peter Lowenberg in 71, related especially to the Nazis in that case. Lynn Hunt, who you mentioned, was interviewed in Cleo's Psyche,
Right.
Gave a very good interview. I think it was a year before she became president of the American Historical Association. It's not as clear cut. If you lead with psychohistory, then you get much stronger reactions, especially more recently, than if it just works into, it's a way of better understanding motivation, and people are impressed and mostly write good reviews.
Alice, and then Michael.
First of all, I feel vindicated by hearing you say that, because I knew there was a reason why I never studied history in college. It was missing something, and I'm glad late in life, I'm glad I rediscovered it here. The other issue I want to raise is a paradox that I hear that's an issue. On the one hand, I understand you're saying that psychohistory doesn't have a definition, of methodology, boundaries, a course outline, which on the one hand is necessary, but on the other hand, I think it contributes to the resistance to integrating it, because people who do it can be seen as, and maybe validly, coming from their own center, arguing something because of their own therapy or because of their own political perspective or how they see a particular leader. And so it feels corrupted in some way by the personal. And I would suggest that we somehow find a way to codify it or structure it, to take it out of the realm of, I'm writing psychohistory because I hate Obama. You know.
All historians do their stuff out of their own psychic needs. This is what we humans do. The historians as intellectuals are a little better at covering it over sometimes, especially earlier in their careers. But to me, that's normal.
That resistance by giving them evidence that they're right.
I think we need to do good work and let them do what they do, though confronted, as David confronted that colleague who said, "Hey, Psycho," in the halls when he went by, and got him to shut up, or as I confronted various people, including colleagues, who gave shots at the field or at Freud. Freud is totally disqualified, and I get the colleague afterwards and get him to face the fact that he might hold that view personally, but there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, and it's not going to go without being challenged.
David?
Also, if you're talking about, it almost makes it sound like your description of psychohistory is talking from the person. But all kinds of disciplines and all kinds of people in all kinds of disciplines do this. Not everybody, and some places it's more tolerated than others, but that's not an alien kind of way of concept of thinking or writing for most people. There's a big issue here about self-identity, identifying oneself. And for some people, for some reasons, whatever, it may be important to identify as a psychohistorian. But there are a whole lot of other people that do plenty good psychohistory that aren't concerned with that, whether they are called psychohistorians or not.
To your point, a colleague of mine said, "Oh, psychohistorians, they're projecting their own stuff into history." At the same time, historians since the 1930s have said, well, every man his own historian. So while they're on the one hand accepting the subjectivity that is inherent in any scholarly work, they're singling out psychohistorians as being only personalizing. There's no way to change that, because while we're doing good work, they're not reading it. They're not hearing us. They're not dialoguing with us. And Paul's right. There were forward-looking editors, Webb and Otto Flanze at the American Historical Review, in the 1970s and early 80s. But since then, my point is, the pendulum has swung all the way against any psychological approaches. But nevertheless, they sneak it in through the back door.
But maybe that's something we can contribute, is actually explaining how it's universal that we project ourselves onto our subjects and integrate that way.
Could I say one more thing? You said you never wanted to study history, now you know why. After 45 years of psychohistory, pick up any history textbook in college level. American history, European history, or world history, there's nothing on the history of childhood. Historians still do not deal with it in any way, shape, or form. I say to my students, do you know anything about the history of childhood? It would be all their own imagination, or projecting what they think about today into the past. Then they read Lloyd's essay, Evolution of Childhood, and suddenly everything becomes clear to them. Thanks.
Phil, did you have a question?
I just had a comment with Dave. I like your comment about is psychohistory a discipline or is it just a method that we talk about? And I think there's a lot of truth to that if you want to just talk about, do we want to be a discipline? If that's the case, what exactly is it that we do? And you mentioned something about motivation. And so is it that psychohistorians study the motivation behind history? Okay.
Motivation behind.
Or,
No.
I mean, well, you know, how it happened, you know, how the Holocaust happened. How did Hitler do his thing? Well, why? Yes. But that's still focusing on the behavior. And is it what the historians really object to is more on a meta level when you stand back and look at the behavior and say what caused that behavior? Okay, what attitudes, what shadows, what other things lurking in humankind are really there and are universal? That's what they don't want to look at. They don't want to look at universal human drives that can combine both violence and goodness. And in their historical interpretation of the Civil War or whatever, they want to see good. And psychohistorians look at more of a meta level, again, not so much on the behavior, but the thinking and the inherent humanness that caused that behavior. See what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you?
Well, but like in the example that Dave read from the conventional historian who claims to doesn't do psychohistory, that's exactly what he's doing. He's explaining, right, using psychological language, sort of actually vaguely psychodynamic. That, but of course he wouldn't think that he's doing anything vaguely related to psychoanalysis. He still thinks psychoanalysis is evil.
It might be even that he can only do that if he denounces it first. And your point is excellent. Historians might describe horrific circumstances and never touch into the why. They just give the picture rather than a creation of the picture.
Even if he acknowledges that Hitler had a bad childhood and might have projected onto things, he doesn't want to admit that all human beings have trauma. And therefore, all of us
They're
have
writing
problems.
trauma and they don't want to know that they're writing trauma. They want to know it and they don't want to know it, which is the nature of trauma. So,
On the same theme, psychiatry is really one of the youngest fields of medicine, but I think what's just been discussed is that people in their own lives have to deal with resistance and depression, but in the last century there have been changes. In, for example, my parents' generation, or my early history, feelings were ignored. People didn't talk about feelings. There was the ideal of family, togetherness. Divorce was a stigma and to be kept secret in one's own home even perhaps. But during we see in our own lives during the past half century to century, more verbalization. For example, the women's movement, civil rights, and overcoming racism, overcoming sexism. Men talking about feelings, men being able to cry. In my son's generation, even sharing many feelings that in my generation, when we were younger, we the success phobia in women. Now, women could be professional and deal with many mixed feelings about parenthood, feelings about marriage. There's been a great evolution in discussing feelings about everything, sexuality, financial issues. So now that that's occurring throughout society globally, and you have to see the history of communications, whereas in the Holocaust area, people said they didn't know. Now people know instantly trauma that may occur in China. And you watch CNN or other news programs. So really, we are going through a global transformation and becoming more humanized, I think. We still have a way to go. And there's less toleration about dealing with the prison population, like what's going on that so many people are warehoused. Where is their humanity? So I think as we're confronting these issues, even politicians now, because of many needs in society, there's like a new humanism, and then people will be more receptive to the whole field of psychohistory. That's my observation. I'm sure you share that.
I think what I'm picking up in terms of the antagonism about psychohistory is a us and them kind of quality. That it's for historians who don't want to think about the motivations, or that, wow, I could have had that same experience or feeling, kind of to separate out and not recognize within yourself that it's there. And I think, in training in psychoanalysis, the biggest thing is to recognize yourself in everyone else, to be able to empathize, even if you didn't have that experience, to be able to, within yourself, imagine what it would be like. And to do that, if you're analyzing why someone could commit the atrocities that they do, I guess a lot of people are saying, well, that means you're forgiving them. But there's an us and them kind of quality, I
Yeah.
think.
My feeling is they impose their us and them on us.
Right.
But we've also been antagonistic towards historians. And we've done things, we as individual psychohistorians, that have given them enough cause to come down on us as well. That's a kind of unwritten history of psychohistory. Our own forcing the rejection on us.
How is that done?
Lots of ways. One is by being very pugnacious, arrogant, asserting that psychohistory is a science and that historians are astrologers. That's not designed to make historians welcome the ideas of the psychological historian.
It's like saying that they're all wrong. You haven't done things.
Yeah.
Right.
On the other hand, I want to share a anecdote by Robert Poise, who years ago at the University of Colorado, there was an open history department. They shared the space in common. All tables were open, no cubicles or anything. And it was near the end of the spring semester, and one of Bob's colleagues asked him, "What are you doing for the summer, Bob?" And he said, "Oh, I'm going to the International Psychohistorical Association convention in Manhattan." With that, his colleague jumped up onto his desk and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Hey, everybody, Bob's going to New York to be with the loons.
With the rules?
You know, how do you respond to that?
Anybody else?
Yeah, but I'm sorry.
It's all right. Trevor?
I want to make a brief comment about, I guess, what was just said, and I have a question for the whole panel. It makes me think of, how Jung changed all the language from libido to numinous, things like that, and he always gave Freud a hard time about, like, why are you sticking with sexuality so much? And Freud's like, I'm just gonna stick to my guns on this. Like, this is what I think, and if people want to hate it, that's fine. But in some ways, it almost sounds like other people do psychohistory, but they don't want the name because they care about their career. So you could almost psychologize the motivations of some psychohistorians and say, well, they're choosing to be outsiders. They're choosing to go on this sinking ship, And maybe in some ways, Freud also kind of wanted to get off on being hated or reviled a bit. But my question for the group is, there's a us against them mentality that we've kind of talked about, but I'm curious about what you see as within the field itself. What are the divisions or problems that have to be overcome?
Can I just say something? Because when I said us and them, I wasn't talking about psychohistorians and historians. I'm talking about looking at history as them, the other. It was a story that happened there. And to try to understand what the actual causes of it were is to make those people in history equal to us.
Responses to what Trevor asked?
I would just say, there was a post on the listserv about changes in leadership, and I think there's probably there's some anxiety and conflict around that. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that, but just the change of a generation is a cause for some resistance.
There's a long history of controversy and different theories, and people who agree and people who disagree in many areas for many years within psychohistory. Content issue, argues the way there is in any field.
But what are the ones right now that you think are the biggest? I mean, when you guys are in this room, I feel like you're the historians
We
and
are,
the people who are...
because, if I may, the field is divided into two groups. The group for the use of psychology and history, which was affiliated with the American Historical Association, and the International Psychohistorical Association, which was an independent group, not sanctioned by anybody. And the group for the use of psychology and history was created by Chuck Strozier, who was the editor of the Psychohistory Review, which was created as a counterpoise to the Journal of Psychohistory. So within psychohistory, there was theoretically two groups. One group that claimed to be the conservative group that was authentic and scholarly, and the other group, this group, that was supposed to be creative and less academic. And that came to an end with the group for the use of psychology and history, which stopped meeting at the American Historical Association when the Psychohistory Review came to an end in 1999.
And where does Wellfleet fit in all this?
David Richard.
Wellfleet's always been its own thing, its own independent. Various people come and go.
So it didn't identify with or against either.
Well, like he said, there was a project to start with. It's sort of we're creating something here, but I mean I don't know any other details of controversy or actual the details of the infighting that you might have prepared around that.
All does.
I cover some of that in my presentation tomorrow, and a student of mine who's very new to the field is giving a paper on Friday morning on the three major psychohistorical journals, Journal of Psychohistory, Psychohistory Review, and Clio Psyche. So you attend those two things, Bill, or rather Trevor, you'll get some more information on that. It's complex. A lot of what had to do with Strozier, who was the only person I personally know of whose appointment was in psychohistory when he was appointed at Sangamon State University, later the University of Illinois became, he was disappointed. He got tired of it, as did the guy who followed him, who's a good friend of his, as editor of the review, and said very explicitly the reward system wasn't there. Most historians saw psychohistory as being ephemeral, and there weren't many appointments in the field. And so, and Strozier at that point had come to New York, where he was able to practice psychoanalysis. He had trained partially in Chicago, where you can train as a historian, but don't go near a patient. And he came to New York, and he quickly concluded the training and became very active in psychoanalytic politics and had practice. But he wants more reward for it. Those writings remain psychohistorical, most historians who are drawn to the field were certainly a lot closer to Strozier than to David or to me in this regard, whose our identities are very much as historians. We're also psychohistorians, and we're not, there are others, though some have died at this point. But there's no great reward system, except the work is its own reward. And so you do the work because, I go to Plato's analogy of the cave. Once you've seen the light and you're not blinded by it and running away from it, you see a new instrument of understanding. You want that, and if your colleagues are not going to be very accepting, that's secondary to me. I very deliberately changed my title to so it would read History, Psychohistory, Interdisciplinary Studies, at a point when my institution was moving away from interdisciplinarity and other modes in which I could teach psychohistory, though everything I teach ends up being psychohistory, because it's part of me, and it becomes part of you when you see the world in a broader sense.
So we have 2 psychohistory journals remaining, and if anybody wants to subscribe, here are the editors. You may talk to them at any time, and they give out their Visa card numbers as well. Michael?
I would be very interested to hear more comments about the generational kind of thing. And it may be premature to ask, but are there feelings of the younger generation, things they really want to cherish and bring forward? Are there things that are different in outlook or focus or approach or whatever? Just anything that's coming up, I would love to hear about it.
38 years of teaching psychohistory. 8,000 students went through my course. It's the most popular history course on campus. Dennis teaches it also at my institution. Students love the course, and then that's it. There's no incentive to proceed unless they want to go into psychology or social work or one of those areas. But there is an audience out there hungering to know deeper causation. And I think that the younger generation might be even larger these days for that insight. I don't know how we tap it.
Peter?
Let me not just talk as a psychohistorian, but also as a history person. The generation that I belong to was sort of the third generation of historians. If you go back, maybe the fourth generation of historians, if you go back into the 19th century. And we read those historians. I read Russian history, Vernadsky, and all those other people who wrote in the late 19th century, early 20th century. That was a huge shift when those individuals died. In my own department, there was a shift, a huge shift, I'd say within the last 5-6 years. Most of the people in my department were hired in the late 60s, early 70s. I don't know hardly anybody in my own department. I retired in 2006. Totally new group of people. Going back to David's point, though, it's not just psychohistory that's being lost. There are whole fields that are being lost, and new ones are being created, obviously. We used to teach Soviet Union and Russian history. We had 3 faculty members. Guess what? Zilch. Nobody. Gone. Even though we are now confronting, again, something very interesting on another part of the world. We used to have American history, the West. A faculty member, brilliant man, guess what happened? He'd retired, and he had more students than anybody else on our campus. He was a brilliant man. Died of a heart attack, that was the end of that. So there are these generational shifts periodically, and when they happen, it's oftentimes it's terrible for the field. The other thing I noticed is that goes again a little bit along with what David was saying. As we age, we may not always stay in the same business, so to speak. We hopefully change over time. I became more of a psychohistorian. I was a Soviet Union economist, one of the last living in this country. And when I die, the last one will have died. I know more about Soviet banking than American banking. But I got into psychohistory, okay? I made that gradual shift. Many of you have shifted already. Whatever you were doing first is already gone. You're doing something else, hopefully. So that's another shift that I noticed. And sometimes it's just little openings where somebody then wiggles in. I got very interested in women's studies. Guess what? Some women got hired. They taught women's history. Taught it first, then they taught it. Now we have a women's history program. Guess what's going to happen to it? The woman who did it for the longest time, she had to come back to take it up again. It's gone. I am horrified. You know, this kind of shifts and tensions that have to do with budgetary issues, department politics, personalities. You see personalities? These are strong personalities over there. And that's true in departments too. We have, you know, the older group will dominate, and then all of a sudden they're gone and the younger ones begin to dominate. So all these things are factors. It's not just psychohistory that's undergoing this tremendous change. The other thing I noticed during the course of my career, we got more conservative in almost every field that I look into. More conservative, more hierarchical, more top-down. My university was a very liberal university because of the system and because of our legislature. It's becoming more conservative. North Carolina is. I hate it, but it's, you know, it's having a huge impact. People begin to change their. I look back on the period before the Nazis really got going. German society got more conservative for all sorts of different reasons. Had to do with the economy. Had to do. That's what I notice now here too. That's another shift that's going to have a huge impact on our fields. You know, as people like us who were liberals, I'm an extreme liberal monarchist, it's not going to be there anymore. So there are all these shifts that are taking place now that are really frightening me in some ways. But on the other hand, the world has been here before, and unless we blow it up, we'll be here a little bit longer. And the new generation is going to go through some of the same things that we've gone through. We'll become more liberal again down the road.
In asking, I was also hoping to hear from some of the younger folks, like Molly and Trevor
Yeah.
and Dennis as well.
I'm interested, well, what I'm thinking about and interested in is something Paul referred to, and it's the pleasure in psychohistory. There's been so much of an emphasis on trauma, and, you know, the field came out of interviewing Holocaust survivors and second generations. I think the areas of pleasure in art and what you do with the war trauma and, you know, Winnicott, just more of the enjoyment, choosing objects of study, where you can also think about the motivation that leads to pleasure and reparation.
So
Does that make any sense, Mike?
So other directions for psychoanalysis within
Yes.
Yes.
psychohistory
Sorry.
for new generations. Susan? Susan had her hand up.
No.
Oh, wasn't, oh, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sandra Indig, and I just wanted to thank the panel for a very wonderful presentation, but I'm so glad you included Peter. I am self-identified as a psychoanalyst, but also a multidisciplinarian in that I'm an artist and poet. And I'm glad that you spoke about recovering from the trauma, which I was not, of course, directly involved with, but most of my family did die in the Holocaust, and I'm still processing that. And as part of my presentation, I am including, and I want to thank you for bringing up the importance of expressive understanding, and especially in child development, because that is where the story is told, through the art, through the language. And actually, artists have always told our history, starting with the caveman. And Herodotus was an artist, a wordsmith, really. I still remember his, when I read that in college. And I think that the expressive understanding is, I hope, a newer addition to certainly psychoanalytic thinking, and now I'm introduced to the whole field of psychohistory, or psychohistorical thinking, and I'm hearing, that you are the people who might embrace this kind of new understanding as a more hopeful way of dealing with the trauma that all of us really live every day, because we don't know when it's going to happen or what's going to happen with what's going on in the world. And the panel I will present with on post-traumatic growth is, I think, helping to identify that, and I'm honored that, because it's such a struggle. Whenever you talk about loony, whenever you mention the word art, people are ready to fall on the floor, or their mind goes blank and God knows what they're imagining. But it is the expressive internal life, and that makes us human. And if we leave that out of our understanding and codify everything to death, I saw this happen with the art therapy journal. I used to get it, I got it for years, because I'm a art therapist as well, not in a hospital. I use it in my own practice. And they've begun to codify every article. Every article is scientifically based. Edith Kramer, I'm sure, was like, who taught at NYU for many, many years, and died within the past year that I studied with her, would be horrified at I think she would be, my fantasy is that Edith Kramer would be horrified at what has happened to that field. They've become more acceptable, but where is the humanity? Where is the heart? Where is the stuff that makes us go on and live?
Psychohistory could be more and more recognized as a discipline if you have 2 courses. One course, for example, Psychohistory of Life Cycle, Marriage and Family Life. And then you could have another course, Psychohistory of Work, Finance, and Economics. To make it 2 courses. And then it could evolve more of it in the undergraduate level, more and more as a discipline.
We have many courses. The issue is, are they, do students enroll in them, and do your colleagues let them run? Those are some of the realities. Most of my psychohistory courses I no longer give anymore because they've narrowed the focus, and so that students have to take this or that, and if you're not right in that category, then you don't get to take the course on childhood. You don't get to take the course on psychohistory, or I had like probably 15 or 20 courses that I've given in my 44 years at my particular college now, and right now there are only a couple that I'm able to give that are psychohistorical directly, such as Hitler, the Holocaust, and genocide. That always enrolls.
Alan?
Yeah, I was thinking, the biographies on historical figures like Louis XIV, FDR, they go into a great deal of detail on childhood, but they never connect their behavior, their childhood experience with their adult situation. Everything is sort of like described, and they're very careful not to make it psychoanalytical. So, kids listen to a lot of events, a lot of dates, they get turned off. And that's one of the problems. I think it's much, as a therapist, we're connected to early childhood and how it affects adult behavior. But a lot of historians just don't get into that. I think that's a problem.
Peter?
History is also safe in some ways. I'll tell you a little story that really surprised me because it wasn't followed up. Putin, Vladimir Putin, the Russian prime minister, he's president right now, did something really interesting. It was in a German paper a couple of days ago. Angela Merkel, the German prime minister, has a great phobia of dogs. When she was a kid, a dog bit her. She is very afraid of dogs. So here is what Putin did. At one of the conferences where he and she were meeting, they both speak Russian and German.
Louder, Peter?
Both speak Russian and German, so it was easy for them to just negotiate. So Putin takes a dog along to this meeting of 2 people. And it's in the paper, and nobody put it into context. It was like he was insulting her, he was doing something to her, but they didn't think for 1 second, which is really too bad. And this is where we come in, I hope, where you say, oh, where does this come from in his life? And what her life, obviously, also, to make the connections, what kind of character this person is, what else is going on or has gone on in his life. So this is a little incident, though, that a psychohistorian can pick up, or picks up, and says, there's something going on here that's not just about this dog. It's got some real, you get my...
Did she say anything?
Yes.
What'd she say?
She was very unhappy.
She told him to get rid of the...
That part I don't know, but whoever was interviewed afterwards said that she was very unhappy about it.
What was the, interesting, what was the effect? Was she
She was
crippled by it?
No, but she
or
was
was she affected by it in the
affected by it,
negotiation?
apparently all her life long.
No, I mean, in
In the initial incident. I
in
don't
that
know
incident,
I don't
how
know
did
that.
it affect her behavior with him?
So there's another incident that happened also between the 2 of them. And again, nobody is looking into why he did this. He let her wait in the middle of the night for one of the meetings. 2 hours. I think some of you have read that in the papers, and nobody kind of followed up on this. I mean, you know, why would a person do this to another person unless in their own lives there's something going on that makes them do that, number one, and then torture another person, quote unquote, insult another person who.
It was also on a horse bear chest.
Well, that's a whole other.
And it was a descendant of the horse that was related to the Hans, the little Hans. Not everybody knows that.
Go ahead.
Well, what is this to me very interesting is on Friday I'm going to present about the terrorists and how the childbearing practices have created these monsters from all these different countries that tortured, killed people, and did all these atrocities. So I was not thinking that I was doing psychohistory, but I think I was, or I am.
What did you think you were doing?
Well, psychoanalysis, you know, narrative.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering about the negative attitude about psychohistory, if it's also negative attitude about psychology and Freud or people that, and also psychologists are portrayed terribly in most media. I think I've only seen like in treatment and very few things that they're portrayed in a way that's, you know, realistic or competent. And just as an anecdote, I've lived in DuPont Circle, and for the last 11 years I've gone to like hundreds of meetings at all the think tanks. And in the first several years, if I would ask a question, I would introduce myself as I'm a clinical and political psychologist, and then I would ask a question like about, do you think if we do this policy, it might escalate violence, or it might have the opposite effect, or, you know, some question. And if I introduced myself as a psychologist, people would think I asked something entirely different than anything that I thought. So I stopped introducing myself as a psychologist, and then I would introduce myself as a social scientist or a conflict analyst, interdisciplinary social scientist. But then now I'm affiliated with the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason, so I introduced myself as from the School for Conflict Analysis. So I think it's a misunderstanding and also a bad impression of the whole field of psychology.
People project, they hear psycho. It's not as bad now as it was when, in the early days of the IPA, when Chaim Schatten, one of the psychiatrists who was an old timer then, said people hear psycho, and the issue becomes, who's the psycho? Is it you? Is it me? Is it somebody else? Because there's so much discussion of psychology in very watered down terms in our society, that isn't as strong, but it's still a tendency that you're going to distance yourself, and you can become anxious and not hear properly, be nervous about what's going to be said and who's the crazy one.
Yeah, and people are afraid that you're going to psychoanalyze them, so they're afraid.
We have nothing else to do but to psychoanalyze other people.
But they don't know that. We know that.
And we do it for free, obviously. My wife is always making that comment. Paul's too worried about his own thing, what he has to do. I just want to have fun with friends, or a nice meal with friends of my wife or mutual friends. But that's a residual that we always have to be aware of in the back of our mind.
Floyd, then Michael, then we have to call it.
Following on this word, I think the word psycho in English is pure pejorative. If you say psychohistory, that means crazy history. And it was really a bad label to pick in terms of marketing. Because the word psycho is the name of a movie with a crazy person. Like the psycho politician is a crazy politician. The psycho university is a crazy university. So that is a prefix. We've intentionally degraded and pejoratized ourselves. But that would have been better.
So do you have a
Psychological
suggestion
history
for an
or
alternate
psychodynamic
name?
history or something, but not just psycho. But too late.
What's the alternative name, and how quickly would the same thing happen to you?
Yeah, like parent history.
Michael? Michael, then we're out of time.
I was just wondering, coming off of this last discussion about, if you say you're a psychologist, people get, in all the psychoanalytic stuff, there's this notion of an unconscious mind, you know, so that I've got something that I don't know about. And that would make a person feel somewhat, and I'm wondering, do you have any sense that that plays a part in all of this? The threat that you all may see something or bring up something that's back there that we don't know about?
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael. One thing, I think the emphasis, like in analysis, the emphasis originally was on one psyche. I think the more we look at systems, and I'm thinking so much about your story, the way we affect one another, the more we can integrate and I think find connections in the world. But because it's a focus on what an individual doesn't know about themselves, rather than how they're influencing somebody, how somebody's responding. So I think the systems theory and family dynamics in the broader world is an interesting a shift in emphasis.
And relational psychology.
Yes. Exactly.
I would like to thank the two Davids, Paul, Molly, and over in the corner, Peter. Thank you very much.